The award bearing her sister's name was resting beneath images of work she had spent 3 years creating. Laurel Elise Ashford Ward's name appeared on the brushed brass plaque, the forest green recipient card, and the screen above the stage. Behind it were Zora Baptiste photographs of quilts, union banners, teaching samplers, and ceremonial garments from the Heritage Workroom collection. Celestine Ward Ashford stood beside Laurel, one hand directing her toward the aisle as applause filled the Halden Glass Pavilion. Zora remained in the second family row. Her speaking card was gone. So was the authorship page she had approved 3 days earlier. She folded the altered program along its existing crease and placed it in her bag before an usher could collect it. Across the room, Conrad Ashford looked down at his copy. His eyes stopped where Zora's name should have been, then shifted to Laurel's recipient card. Zora saw recognition cross his face. He stayed seated. Laurel reached the stage and accepted the plaque. Dr. Lenora Morrow, chair of the independent judging panel, turned the award packet toward herself. It carried anonymous submission code HC 2714. She checked her scoring sheet, then looked at the registration strip attached to Laurel's stage credential. The identifiers did not match. The screen changed to a magnified image of a folded commemorative banner. Zora noticed a faint mirrored stain along its cream silk border. 2 dyed layers had been left in contact. She sent a message to the collections coordinator. Separate the upper layer. Lower the temporary light. Photograph before moving. The reply came almost immediately. Understood. Zora pressed her thumb against her index finger, measuring the stain from the projected scale, the same gesture her mother had used over cutting tables. Even while her work was being credited to someone else, the collection still needed protection. Laurel thanked the foundation for trusting her vision. Dr. Morrow leaned toward the microphone. Could you explain how you evaluated dye instability in the high-risk textiles? Laurel smiled. Our team followed standard conservation practices. Which tests informed the separation priorities? Laurel glanced toward Celestine. Zora handled the technical implementation under my broader strategy. The room shifted. One community representative lowered her hands. A judge stopped writing. Odessa Hollis, seated near the cooperative delegation, looked toward Zora with neither pity nor surprise. Conrad remained silent. Zora photographed the stage, the plaque, and the recipient card in one frame. Dr. Morrow lifted the award packet. This submission code does not correspond to Ms. Ashford Ward's registration. Celestine approached the stage steps. There was a late administrative consolidation. We can clarify it after the presentation. Zora stood without moving toward the stage. I am requesting preservation of the original submission, the scoring records, every program version, and the recipient export used tonight. Celestine's expression hardened. Zora, this is not the place. It became the place when my work appeared under another person's name. Dr. Morrow looked directly at her. Ms. Baptiste, the panel is requesting your original work, your process records, and a direct explanation before final confirmation of this award. A foundation administrator hurried to Elias Mercer, the independent audit secretary. He checked his watch. Temporary ceremony accounts synchronize to the annual archive at 9. Some event-level access records may be overwritten by the permanent export. It was 8:39. Dr. Morrow paused final confirmation of the award. Celestine called it an administrative misunderstanding. Conrad finally stood, but he did not address the judges. He looked at Zora as if asking her to wait for privacy. The board was scheduled to consider a funding recommendation connected to the winning project. If Laurel's false attribution entered the permanent record, restricted, preservation money could support Celestine's commercial Ashford Atelier proposal. Zora could leave the ceremony and protect herself from further humiliation. She could refuse to give the room another reaction to interpret, but leaving would not protect the collection, the trainees, or the families whose names were still missing from its records. 21 minutes remained before synchronization, and the only credible way to preserve the truth would also place Zora's own decisions, records, and mistakes under independent review. Elias gave Zora a small office across the pavilion corridor. She placed the altered program on the desk and opened her laptop while the ceremony resumed without finalizing the award. The stage images had made the project look elegant and complete. The actual collection held 2,760 cataloged quilts, garments, banners, samplers, union textiles, and tools, plus more than 1,000 uncatalogued fragments and related records. 412 objects had been classified as high or critical risk. Some had absorbed moisture after a roof failure. Others showed unstable dyes, weakened fibers, pest activity, or maker histories separated from the objects they belonged to. 10 paid community trainees had been preparing the collection for supervised reopening, where local families, students, and researchers could study the materials without surrendering community ownership. Reverend Althea Brooks Van, chair of the Threadwell Community Collection Cooperative, joined Zora by video. The board packet cites the award recommendation, Althea said. It is not an automatic grant, but they are using it to support the commercial plan. The Ashford Atelier proposal promised a luxury retail and events destination centered on a small display of attractive objects. Most of the working collection will be transferred into commercial storage. Community ownership would remain on paper while donors gained influence over access, interpretation, and preservation priorities. They cannot take the building tonight, Althea said. No, Zora answered. But tonight becomes the record they use next week. She opened the original condition assessment, the environmental plan, the maker attribution protocol, the trainee curriculum, and the restricted fund budget. Then she reached the master treatment priority model. The shared cooperative repository contained exported reports, but the editable model remained in Zora's individual professional workspace. 2 vendor decision rationales had never been fully mirrored. She had assumed the exports were enough because she would always be available to explain them. That assumption looked different now. A message arrived from the collections coordinator. The banner layers have been separated. No fresh transfer was visible beyond the original mirrored stain. Zora requested photographs and handling documentation, then reviewed another disputed group. A commercial consultant had described dark speckling on several teaching samplers as active mold requiring broad disposal. Zora compared the photographs with earlier condition notes. Most of the staining was old and inactive. She sent a limited recommendation through the authorized emergency channel. Isolate the uncertain pieces, retain the stable group, and confirm before disposal. She did not claim authority she no longer possessed. The office printer jammed while producing the connected funding memorandum. Of course you did, Zora muttered. At home, she called her printer the board because it resisted simple instructions and produced heat instead of decisions. The small joke lasted only long enough for her to clear the paper. The memorandum cited the Heritage Continuity Award as evidence that the preservation commercial hybrid had qualified leadership. Celestine had approved the public legacy language. A related party appendix described Zora Baptiste as an outside technical contractor with no family relationship to the founder. That statement was false, but family identity could not prove authorship or competence. The institution would have to correct both questions without confusing them. Conrad entered without knocking. I can have the funding language removed before the vote, he said. Through what process? I can speak to the right people. That is the process that put Laurel on the stage. He lowered his voice. This does not have to become a public institutional crisis. It already became one when you saw the program and stayed in your seat. Conrad looked at the altered copy. Stopping the ceremony would have damaged the foundation. You decided public calm mattered more than whether the record was true. Elias returned with the preliminary preservation form. He confirmed that Zora could authorize certified identity records through neutral custodians while submitting professional evidence through a separate channel. Zora signed requests for the state acknowledgement, amended birth record, historic insurance and education records, and earlier foundation disclosures. None of those records would prove the work was hers. Then she looked at the editable treatment model. The decision was no longer whether she could prove Celestine wrong. It was whether she was willing to let reviewers find where her own system had failed, and whether protecting the collection mattered enough to risk losing the authority she had spent years earning. At 8:44 p.m., Elias placed the Attribution and Restricted Funds Integrity Notice between them. The notice would preserve relevant records and place Zora's own project systems under review. Conrad remained near the door. "Give me until morning," he said. "I will replace the grant amount personally and make sure you receive proper recognition. The award is not the collection." "I know." "Then stop offering substitutes for a process you allowed Celestine to compromise." He proposed a private Ashford Material Technologies contract, a corrected donor announcement, and language describing the ceremony as an administrative error. Each offer preserved the same imbalance. Laurel's false credit would become a mistake instead of a choice. Celestine's authority would remain intact. Conrad's prior knowledge would stay private. The collection would become dependent on another Ashford arrangement. Zora pushed the notice toward Elias. "I will not interrupt their ceremony, but I will not consent to my work being confirmed under another person's name." Elias pointed to the audit consent section. "Once this is entered, final award confirmation stops. The connected funding recommendation is held. Your access may be suspended. Your private project workspace can be examined." "I understand. If the review finds failures in your controls, they remain in the record." Zora thought of the editable model, the missing rationales, and the way she had carried too much of the project inside her own head. She had told herself that speed mattered because fragile materials could not wait for committees. She had also told herself that no one else understood the collection well enough to question her priorities. Both ideas contained truth. Together, they had created dependence. She checked the necessary preservation categories: program drafts, recipient exports, engraving instructions, submission mappings, scoring sheets, presentation histories, conflict disclosures, funding memoranda, and awards committee communications. She attached the condition assessment, treatment framework, environmental plan, maker attribution protocol, trainee records, laboratory correspondence, budgets, presentation files, and repository exports. She added explicit consent for examination of her access controls and documentation failures. At 8:47 p.m., she signed. Elias entered the notice into the independent audit register and sent the preservation command to Northbridge. Final award confirmation became formally suspended. The connected funding recommendation was placed on hold. Zora's foundation-funded access was frozen pending review. Her remaining payments were subject to hold. No one declared her the rightful recipient. No one restored her speaking place. The institution had only agreed that the ceremony could not decide the truth. Dr. Morrow joined them through a secure call. She confirmed that HC 2714 appeared on the award packet, but warned that the code proved nothing until Northbridge authenticated its original mapping and later changes. "We need your unedited files and the basis for your treatment priorities," she said. "You will have them," Zora answered, "including the materials that may reflect poorly on my controls." "That matters," Dr. Morrow said. Conrad stepped closer after the call. "You have made this larger than it needed to be." "No, I made it large enough to include what happened." Zora's phone rang. Bernice Clay was calling from the garden behind their duplex. A cold front was approaching, and Bernice wanted to know whether the basil should be covered. Zora told her where the cloth was stored, then admitted that Laurel had received the award under Zora's work. "Are you fighting for the trophy?" Bernice asked. "No, I am fighting to stop them from using it to decide what happens to the collection. Then make sure the fight can survive without you standing in every doorway." Northbridge confirmed that the preservation command had reached the submission system before. Synchronization. The original mapping, server logs, and award export were locked. At the same time, the Foundation suspended Zora's collection access and payment authority. Celestine issued a statement describing the pause as a technical reconciliation triggered by an emotional family objection. Laurel's plaque was secured in an administrative cabinet. Conrad left without saying goodbye. Zora began exporting the editable treatment model. The first audit note arrived before midnight. The team could not reproduce the reasoning behind 37 priority decisions from the shared repository alone, for it had no complete backup path. The notice that might prove Zora's authorship had also exposed the weakness she had mistaken for efficiency. Zora read the note twice, then sent Elias the missing access key. She had entered the review demanding that the institution examine everyone's choices. Her own could not be exempt. By morning, Zora's credentials had been disabled, and her final 2 contract payments were on hold. For treatment teams, paused work. 10 trainees were told not to report. 2 of them called Odessa to ask whether the collection was closing permanently. A third had already used the expected wages to reserve childcare for the month. Threadwell could not promise when the shifts would return. From her kitchen table, Zora answered only the technical questions Elias permitted. The interim team had found fresh insect fragments near ceremonial garments trimmed with black wool. Zora compared the new photographs with earlier inspection records. The activity followed the wool trim rather than the surrounding cotton and silk. She recommended expanding the quarantine boundary, shortening inspection intervals, and documenting every movement through the shared repository. This time, she wrote the reasoning in full. Dr. Safia Cole confirmed that her laboratory intake records matched Zora's earlier sample requests. Threadwell's custody log showed that Zora had directed the collection survey long before Laurel became associated with the project. The evidence strengthened authorship, but the pause remained because several decisions still could not be reconstructed without Zora's private workspace. Community reaction divided quickly. Some families believed the foundation had stolen Zora's work. Others asked why a community collection had become dependent on one professional, even a trusted one. Zora could not dismiss that question as disloyalty. Conrad came to her duplex that afternoon. He carried a slim folder and stood beside the raised garden beds rather than sending staff to the door. "I can replace your withheld payments today," he said. "No, the trainees should not suffer." Then support the review without buying influence over it. The folder contained a private conservation contract from Ashford Material Technologies and a proposed donor statement praising Zora while calling the ceremony problem an administrative error. "You are offering money, a contract, and a private compliment," she said. "None of them preserve the record. I'm trying to keep the collection alive through the same family power that placed the wrong person on the stage." Years earlier, when Zora was 11, Conrad had taken her through an idle weaving floor. An orange test strip kept drifting out of alignment. When she asked why one thread pulled differently, he spent 2 hours tracing tension through the loom with her. He later mailed her the crooked strip when she entered conservation school, with a note about discovering hidden force. The memory proved that he had loved her. It did not prove that he had acted fairly. "You taught me that misalignment has a cause," she said. "You do not get to call this a misunderstanding because the cause embarrasses you." A staff delivery record already showed that a marked program proof had reached Conrad's office before the ceremony. His calendar also contained a briefing about the revised speaking order. The evidence did not yet establish everything he knew, but ignorance was becoming implausible. "What do you want from me?" Conrad asked. "Nothing private. If you knew, disclose it. If you had power to stop it, say what you chose instead." He left with the folder unopened. That evening, the interim team reported that Zora's revised pest priorities had been implemented through shared documentation. No new fragments appeared in the adjacent enclosure group. Zora felt relief, followed by the sharper knowledge that the team had succeeded without restoring her access. At the same time, Celestine began contacting Foundation staff. She described Laurel as the project strategist and Zora as a technical specialist who had resisted collaborative language. A communications contractor received a draft statement asking him to confirm that the public program reflected an agreed division of work. One staff member preserved the request. Another declined to sign and was removed from ceremony follow-up duties. By midnight, the university warned that its imaging equipment could be reassigned if the pause continued. The cooperative began debating whether the preservation plan had become too dependent on Zora to remain viable. Zora sat beside the old steel coffee pot while jazz played from the radio. The review was proving that the work belonged to her. It was also proving how much the system had relied on her remaining present, and how many ordinary people were paying for that weakness before any powerful person had faced a consequence. 6 days after the ceremony, the independent team reviewed the 412 objects classified as high or critical risk. Zora attended remotely from the Northbridge Record Suite. She could see the work tables, but could not enter the collection rooms. The distance made each result feel both personal and beyond her control. 286 objects have been stabilized or rehoused. 94% of new handling packets pass quality review. Active pest evidence in targeted zones had fallen by 63% after the black wool trim groups were isolated. 171 maker records have been reconnected to objects. No new dye transfer appeared in the corrected enclosure group. All 10 trainees had passed their first handling and documentation assessments before the suspension. The numbers confirmed that Zora's work had changed physical outcomes. Sophia's laboratory records supported the fiber and dye analysis. Odessa Hollis authenticated cooperative custody logs and community maker histories. Reviewers also rejected the commercial consultant's broad disposal recommendation after confirming that most staining on the teaching samplers was old and inactive. Materials that might have been discarded remained eligible for treatment. Northbridge then presented the award attribution findings. Its server-side export showed that HC 2714 originally belonged to Zora's author declaration. The code entered Laurel's ceremony packet through an event profile without required judging panel approval. The code proved an unauthorized attribution change, but not authorship by itself. Reviewers matched Zora's original files to the projected images, compared creation histories, checked laboratory intake dates, reviewed cooperative minutes, and traced vendor transmissions. Laurel was asked to identify an original technical decision. She described prioritizing visually important objects. Zora's actual model prioritized material vulnerability, maker significance, handling risk, and treatment reversibility. The framework existed before Laurel joined the commercial proposal. Dr. Morrow asked Laurel how she had approved the revised quarantine sequence. Laurel answered that Zora's staff had handled those details. There was no Zora staff, Odessa said from the cooperative table. There were paid trainees and shared custodians. Zora trained them. Laurel did not. Laurel looked towards Celestine before asking for a break. Then the review turned to Zora's limitation. 37 treatment priority decisions could not be reproduced immediately from the shared repository, for had to be reversed temporarily while the interim team rebuilt their rationales. The original choices were not necessarily wrong. The system was. Zora's maternal aunt met her during a break and handed her coffee in a paper cup. You kept saying the work was safer with you holding the threads, she said. What happened when they cut you out? The team lost time. The collection lost time. Zora looked through the glass at reviewers reconstructing her decisions. I documented the results. You did not always document how someone else could continue without you. The words did not cancel what Celestine had done. They prevented Zora from using injustice as permission to ignore her own error. Inside the hearing room, Elias presented stronger evidence of Conrad's knowledge. A marked program proof had been delivered to his office. His calendar showed a briefing titled Revised Legacy Program and Speaking Order. A handwritten acknowledgement beside Zora's removed speaking slot carried his initials. Celestine responded with a risk memorandum claiming Zora had treated community property as private intellectual territory and that Ashford Atelier offered more stable management. The memorandum cited the 37 unreproducible decisions while omitting the preservation results. Dr. Morrow ordered both findings presented together. By the end of the session, no serious reviewer believed Laurel had created the conservation strategy. The unresolved question was whether Zora's verified authorship and strong performance justified restoring her to sole control of a system that had failed when she lost access. Identity records were also authenticated. They confirmed that Zora was Conrad's legally acknowledged daughter and that Zora Baptiste was her established professional name. Elias stated clearly that the identity finding created no award, role, ownership right, or authority. Dr. Morrow closed the session. The work has an author. The institution must still decide whether the proposed system deserves trust. Zora shut her laptop. For years she had believed that being undeniable would make her safe. Now her authorship was nearly undeniable, and the institution could still decide that the collection was safer without her in charge. The formal defeat arrived 2 days later. The Heritage Continuity Award was voided for the cycle. It would not be transferred to Zora. Laurel would not keep the plaque, but Zora would not receive a corrected one. Her suspension remained in effect. The Foundation declared her ineligible for immediate appointment as sole conservation lead until the continuity failure had been corrected and independently reviewed. Restricted funds stayed frozen. Threadwell assigned temporary custody to a conservator, an elected community custodian, and an external collections manager. The university reassigned its imaging equipment. The reopening moved back 7 weeks. 83 high-risk objects entered temporary outside cold storage. Commercial relocation remained on the board agenda if the preservation structure could not be stabilized. Zora read the decision twice. The review had verified that the work belonged to her. It had also verified that the recovery system could not safely depend on her continuing access. At home, she opened a basket of fabric scraps from personal sewing projects she had abandoned over the years. A sleeve cut too narrow, a twisted lining, a waistband measured incorrectly. She could stabilize a century-old banner and still fail to make herself a wearable jacket. Expertise had never meant perfection. She opened the editable treatment model and began removing herself from its center. The new distributed stewardship and treatment charter required shared repository ownership, dual validation for high-risk changes, an independently selected deputy steward, equal emergency stop authority for Threadwell's elected custodian, documented succession procedures, conflict logs, and quarterly external review. Authorship records would remain separate from operational authority so that sharing control could never be used to erase who created the work. Zora sent the first draft to Althea, Sophia, Odessa, and the interim team. She did not ask them to support her return. She asked them to identify where the charter still depended on her. Odessa demanded equal access to maker attribution records. Sophia required independent review of high-risk testing assumptions. The interim conservator requested clearer authority during environmental emergencies. One trainee asked who would have power to stop a treatment if both senior professionals agreed, but the community custodian objected. Zora revised the charter to make the emergency stop effective immediately, with written review afterward rather than permission beforehand. She transferred the editable model, recorded explanations for the 37 disputed decisions, and required another qualified person to reproduce each rationale without her help. For still failed the test. She rewrote them. She offered to train the team through recorded sessions while remaining excluded from direct handling. The collection could begin moving forward without waiting for her reinstatement. The choice cost her more than suspension. She was surrendering the control she had mistaken for protection. Celestine then received a written opportunity to withdraw Laurel's confirmation, identify the program change path, preserve all records, correct attribution, recuse from the funding decision, and stop contacting staff about retrospective statements. Compliance would not erase the misconduct, but would limit the damage. Conrad attempted to call Zora after learning that his MARC program proof had entered the record. She declined the call and required all communication to be written and preserved. His first message asked whether she intended to end their relationship over one night. Zora did not answer. The ceremony had lasted one night. His habit of choosing private affection over public fairness had lasted much longer. Laurel received her own correction opportunity. She asked whether returning the plaque would end the investigation. Dr. Morrow told her the plaque was no longer the central issue. The work, funding recommendation, false attribution, and staff pressure remained even if the object disappeared. Celestine did not correct the record. Instead, she submitted a formal declaration claiming Laurel had originated the strategy, Zora had voluntarily accepted a technical role, and HC 2714 had been routinely transferred. She attached a selective message export, a project summary without author fields, and an assigned role memorandum created after the ceremony. She also instructed an assistant to dispose of surplus printed programs after the preservation notice. Several copies had already been secured elsewhere. The instruction did not destroy the evidence. It made her final choice visible. Zora finished the fourth charter revision that night. It no longer asked the institution to trust her because she had been right. It asked the institution to test whether the work could survive when every person, including Zora, was removable, reviewable, and accountable. The independent verification session opened with the Ashford family removed from the decision table. Northbridge's server-side export confirmed that HC 2714 had been assigned to Zora's author declaration during blind review. No authorized transfer existed. Ceremony production had later pulled Laurel's event profile into the award packet without judging panel approval or Zora's confirmation. The panel then examined the broader evidence. File histories linked the condition maps, treatment framework, reopening plan, and maker attribution protocol to Zora months before Laurel entered the project. Cooperative logs recorded when those materials entered community custody. Laboratory intake records matched Zora's sample requests. Vendor transmissions carried her instructions and dates. The stage images came from her annotated condition files. Safia explained the fiber and dye findings, then disclosed that her laboratory had corrected one preliminary sample label before issuing the final report. Celestine's attorney challenged the correction. Safia produced the intake photograph, correction log, instrument record, and final matched object number. A corrected error is not the same as a hidden one, she said. Odessa authenticated the cooperative records and described the real cost of the suspension. Her testimony supported Zora's work without excusing Zora's control failure. Zora answered each technical question directly. Then she explained why 37 decisions had not been reproducible. I treated my availability as a safeguard. That was not a continuity plan. Dr. Morrow asked whether the new charter existed only to secure her return. Zora answered, "It has to work if I never return." The interim conservator confirmed that the revised decision records could now be reproduced by another qualified person. Odessa confirmed that the cooperative held full repository access. Laurel received one final opportunity to correct the record. At first, she repeated that she had provided strategic direction. When asked for the earliest document containing that direction, she could not produce one. She looked at Celestine, then at the community representatives whose work had been displayed behind her during the ceremony. After a long pause, she submitted Celestine's private briefing packet and several voice notes. In one recording, Celestine coached Laurel to call Zora an implementer. In another, Laurel asked whether the judges knew the award name had changed. Celestine replied that once the ceremony was complete, no one would challenge the family publicly. Laurel admitted she had known the technical work was Zora's. She said she had convinced herself that public leadership and authorship were close enough to share. Dr. Morrow told her they were not. Laurel's cooperation reduced the need to reconstruct some communications. It did not erase that she had accepted the plaque and claimed authority she did not possess. Celestine's formal declaration was examined last. Her selective message export omitted earlier attachments preserved in a staff account. The stripped project summary was created after the award pause. The unsigned role memorandum was generated the morning after the ceremony. Production records also confirmed her disposal instruction after the preservation notice. Celestine was offered a chance to amend the declaration. She refused. She said the foundation had needed a public leader donors it could understand and that Zora had never learned how institutions survived. Conrad then submitted his signed disclosure. He admitted receiving the marked program proof, attending the revised speaking order briefing, seeing Zora's role removed, and choosing not to interrupt the ceremony. He admitted offering private money and an Ashford contract afterward. He did not ask the panel to give Zora the award or appoint her. His disclosure confirmed his responsibility, but created no outcome. Elias read the identity evidence into a separate record: state documents, historic disclosures, insurance, and education. Files and Conrad's acknowledgement confirmed that Zora Naomi Ashford Baptiste was his legally acknowledged daughter. They also confirmed that Zora Baptiste was her established professional name. Dr. Morrow stated that the identity finding proved no authorship, award entitlement, ownership, employment right, or professional authority. When the session ended, Zora's work had been independently verified. Celestine's false declaration had been contradicted. Conrad's silence had been documented. The board still had to decide whether the corrected system Zora had created deserved funding and whether Threadwell, not the Ashford family, would control what came next. The public finding session was held in the Threadwell Cooperative Meeting Room rather than on the Foundation's award stage. Community representatives sat at the front. The Ashford family sat behind them. Dr. Morrow began with award integrity. The recipient attribution had been changed after blind judging without panel approval, conflict disclosure, or confirmation from Zora. Celestine had exceeded her committee authority. Laurel had accepted credit for work she knew she had not created. The award was voided and retired for the cycle. It would not be re-engraved for Zora. The authorship finding came next. Independent records established that Zora created and directed the condition assessment, treatment framework, maker attribution protocol, trainee curriculum, reopening plan, and restricted fund budget. The judges issued a technical commendation recognizing her as the verified author. The commendation created no automatic role. The professional governance finding confirmed that Zora's work produced measurable results while her repository structure created unacceptable continuity risk. Authorship did not erase the limitation. The restricted funds finding concluded that the Ashford Atelier proposal had improperly treated preservation money as available for commercial redevelopment. The compromised award could not support that recommendation. The governance finding required all Ashford family members to recuse from the corrective vote. Elias then issued the separate identity correction. Zora Naomi Ashford Baptiste is the legally acknowledged direct daughter of founder Conrad Ellis Ashford. Zora Baptiste is her established professional name. The notice created no award, board seat, inheritance right, ownership interest, appointment, or funding authority. Only after the identity correction was complete did the non-conflicted board consider the preservation decision. Members reviewed the verified treatment results, the remaining collection risks, the cooperative's testimony, and the distributed stewardship and treatment charter. One board member asked whether the 7-week delay proved commercial relocation was safer. Odessa answered that relocation would transfer control without correcting the collection's vulnerabilities. Safia explained that the revised technical system now distributed decisions instead of hiding them. Althea stated that Threadwell would reject any funding that required donor control over interpretation or ownership. Zora addressed the board as a professional accountable to a community owner, not as Conrad's daughter. She explained the shared repository, independent deputy, dual validation, equal emergency stop authority, succession procedures, and external review. She also stated what the charter corrected in her own practice. "I'm not asking you to restore the system that failed," she said. "I'm asking you to evaluate the one we built after the failure became visible." The preliminary board position had favored commercial relocation if the recovery structure could not demonstrate stable leadership. The recorded vote changed. The board rejected commercial diversion and approved conditional preservation funding under Threadwell cooperative control. The decision cited Zora's verified work, measurable results, and corrected governance system. Conrad issued no instruction and cast no vote. Her work changed the board's vote because it survived independent examination and because she had changed the structure around it. Threadwell then conducted a separate appointment process. The cooperative offered Zora the position of lead conservation steward under the charter. An independently selected deputy steward would share documented authority. Odessa would hold equal emergency stop power. The cooperative would own the repository. Quarterly review would remain mandatory. No Ashford family member would control hiring, treatment priorities, interpretation, or maker attribution. Zora accepted only after requiring that trainee positions remain paid, no Ashford name be added to the building or laboratory, and no commercial use occur without separate cooperative consent. Her role came from work, correction, and accountable judgment. It did not come from the identity notice. Conrad resigned as board chair, lost nomination authority for 4 years, surrendered the founder-observer seat, and accepted an external governance review. Ashford Material Technologies was excluded from recovery procurement. Unrestricted Ashford funds would cover review costs, storage, and restored trainee wages without naming or control rights. Conrad listened without objecting. For the first time, he could not convert loss of authority into a private promise. Celestine was removed from committee leadership and barred from award administration and restricted grant contact for 4 years. Laurel lost current cycle eligibility, left foundation heritage programming, and received a 2-year restriction from grant selection panels. She retained her unrelated event production career. Northbridge accepted a procedural finding and added dual approval for recipient exports. The consequences changed authority and process. They did not create arrests, instant ruin, or universal reconciliation. Zora's name was accurate. Her work was verified. Her role was earned. The collection was still 7 weeks behind, and none of the findings could return the time already lost. The Heritage Workroom collection reopened 7 weeks late. The 10 trainees returned with restored wages and access to the shared repository. The independently selected deputy steward worked beside Zora rather than beneath her. Odessa held equal emergency stop authority and used it on the first morning when a delivery arrived without complete environmental documentation. No one treated the pause as an insult. They treated it as the charter working. 39 objects remained in extended outside treatment. 14 were still too fragile for display. The university imaging slot had been lost. Some maker families remained wary of the foundation. Others remained wary of Zora's former habit of carrying too much authority alone. Recognition had not restored every loss. The false recipient seat card bearing Laurel's name entered a governance training file beside the altered program and correction notice. It was not displayed as a trophy. In the reopened research room, a central table held maker attribution cards, source fields, and verification instructions. Families could bring photographs, church programs, union records, oral histories, and names that had been separated from objects over decades. Each attribution required corroboration. The process was slower than printing a confident label. That was why Zora trusted it. She used Zora Baptiste professionally. The foundation recorded her full legal name accurately in related party disclosures. Neither name gave her power beyond the role Threadwell had evaluated and granted. The building carried no Ashford name. Ashford Atelier disappeared from the board agenda. Laurel corrected her public biography and removed the claim that she had led the preservation strategy. She sent Zora a short acknowledgement through Elias without asking for a meeting or forgiveness. Zora filed it and did not answer immediately. Laurel's later cooperation mattered. It did not create a relationship Zora was not ready to offer. Celestine did not contact her. Conrad's first permitted letter arrived 6 weeks after the findings in a plain envelope with no staff note, invitation, or gift. Zora placed it beside the dinner coffee pot. She watered the mint with Bernice, repaired the hem of a pair of work trousers, and allowed the letter to remain unopened until the thread was tied off. When she finally read it, Conrad did not ask her to excuse him. He wrote that he had confused silence with protection and private generosity with repair. He described the authority he had lost without calling it sacrifice. He said he would follow her terms whether or not she ever invited him closer. Zora folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. A boundary did not become less real because someone finally respected it. At the collection, every high-risk decision now required an explanation another qualified person could question and continue. At first, each shared approval felt like surrender. Over time, It felt like proof that the work no longer depended on her being impossible to remove. During the second week after reopening, the deputy steward challenged one of Zora's enclosure priorities and produced stronger environmental data. Zora changed the decision into shared record. No one treated revision as defeat. The trainees watched two senior professionals disagree, document the reason, and leave the system clearer than they had found it. One afternoon, a trainee found a maker's name in a faded church anniversary program and connected it to a quilt catalog for 30 years as maker unknown. Odessa verified the family record. The deputy steward checked the documentary chain. A granddaughter supplied a photograph showing the same stitched border and church initials. Zora signed last, not because her signature mattered most, but because every role had to remain visible. The corrected card entered the record under the maker's own name. The granddaughter read it twice, then pressed her fingers to the edge of the table without touching the quilt. Zora stepped back and let the family occupy the moment. That was the future she had wanted before the award, before the stage, and before anyone asked which Ashford daughter belonged in the recipient's seat. Another daughter can be welcomed into the family record and still discover that someone has rewritten the cost of belonging. The seat had carried the wrong name for one night. The work had changed, was allowed to decide what came next. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.